I mean, this is going to be really bad. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Well, we might have thought that the race was in the bag, but that's just not what's panning out in Michigan right now. There's a lot going on that we're just not really sure what's going to happen here. And I do gotta say that I definitely am now doing a Southern accent. This is Political Playlist Happy Hour.
Welcome to Political Playlist
All right, are we ready, guys?
Happy Hour.
Happy Hour.
We fucked that up so bad.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Political Playlist Happy Hour. Welcome to Happy Hour.
I'm Anthony Barquette.
I'm Anna Mossy Goldwyn.
I'm Michael Kristof, and folks, improv class was canceled today, so we're getting our kicks out live on the airwaves.
You guys didn't like my Midwestern accent?
That was wonderful, Anna. Yeah,
Would
I
love
don't know
to see
how
how that accent changes with a drink in hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I veered into Southern.
Yeah, and by the way, I think we just lost about 12 subscribers from Michigan after that, so apologies to the Upper
I
Peninsula.
apologize. You know what? Yesterday I
fun.
asked my sister if I speak differently than I did in high school since I've lived in California for so long, and she said yes, and I said, like what? And she said, well, and I said, do I talk like a Valley girl? And she said, yeah, kind of. So,
Wow.
you know,
Interesting.
we're all struggling with
That's
our
so
accents,
interesting.
apparently.
I think what I'm more interested in is what in God's green earth prompted you to ask if you sound different. What was
Because her boyfriend is from Arkansas, and we were talking about
Oh.
Arkansas, and I
Does
was
he have like a
asking,
real accent?
He doesn't. He has like a little bit of like a twang, but I was asking him if his family has super strong accents, and he was saying yes. And then he played me a voicemail from his Meemaw,
Oh, wow.
and
Who he calls Meemaw.
who had a real accent in her
Oh,
voicemail, and so then that prompted a discussion about accents.
Do I have an
Wow.
accent? Do you guys feel I have an accent?
Yes,
No,
you
but
have an
you-
absolute. Oh my God, you have such a San Diego like BroCal. Like,
I don't think it's an
Newport.
accent though. It's more like a. I think that Southern California specifically, it's not as much an accent as it is like a measure of speaking.
Yes, it's
It's
like
like
a
you speak
laconic-
kinda
it's a
slowly.
laconic tone.
Yeah, your
Well,
words kind of meld together.
We walk slow. We talk
Yeah.
slow.
Yes.
But everyone thinks I'm from the South.
Mm.
It's crazy.
I
I
don't
get
get
it
that.
all the time. Yeah, me too. I
Mm.
don't.
I don't think that.
Yeah.
I don't think that.
It might be the hair. Maybe it's the
Yeah.
hair.
Yeah.
We can tell you who's not from the South,
Mm.
and that is
No.
the politician on our playlist this week.
That is true.
Who is on
Representative-
our playlist this week?
Representative hopeful Senator Haley Stevens from Michigan.
Wow. At first I was like, you started to say Representative Hope, and I was like, oh, her name's Hope now. Okay. But then I connected
I've
what you were
lost
trying
it.
to say. Yes.
I've lost it.
Yes. Senate hopeful Representative Haley Stevens of Michigan. We have had Haley Stevens, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, on our show. She was wonderful to talk to. I guess maybe now that she's in a competitive race, we should get her back on the show. Anthony, what's the goings on in Michigan right now? What's
Okay.
up
Well,
there?
let's start with
What are they
some.
doing in Michigan over there,
Yeah.
huh?
Okay.
We
okay, for
thought this
starters,
race was in the bag,
Anna,
don't you know?
Pipe it over there, okay? For starters, some breaking news, really, which happened earlier this week. But there were three candidates running.
Anthony, I hate to interrupt you here, but something spotty with your internet. I don't know if it's because you're out on the lake or whatnot, but you're cutting in and out.
Okay.
But
Hold
you
on.
are.
This happened. This is what happened the other day, Anthony, when we were doing our episode.
With me?
Lordy.
Yeah, remember
With-
when we had to like restart because your voice was like speeding up? It kind of went away though, so maybe just try
Okay.
again.
Should I
Just try
talk
to talk again.
slower? Okay.
Oh, that's
Better.
So, potentially, this is breaking news that happened a couple days ago. but there were 3 candidates running in the Democratic primary, which is on August 4th, coming up. And the 3 candidates are Haley Stevens, who's a current congresswoman, Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, and then former Wayne County Health Director, Dr. Abdul El Sayed. Anyways, Michigan State
Can we try restarting this? That's so
I will
weird.
say this is what happened last time, and it's recording fine on his end.
Okay.
So
do you want to like listen to the recording and see if it's working?
No, it works because last time it happened again when it was just the 2 of us doing the episode, and then the recording was totally fine because the recording is local on your computer.
Okay.
Yeah. But now it's fine again. So
do you want me to just retake from the top right now so you don't need to cut?
That would be great.
Yeah, just so it's easier to cut. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Well, earlier this week, there was a lot of news in Michigan. One of the Democratic candidates who was running in the primary just dropped out. The primary is scheduled for August 4th, 2026, so in less than a month. And the 3 candidates who are running are Congresswoman Haley Stevens. We have Dr. Abdul El Sayed, who's the former Wayne County Health Director. And we had State Senator Mallory McMorrow, who announced that she is suspending her campaign. In her campaign video, she did not endorse Stevens or El Sayed, but she did say whoever wins in the primary, she will support fully. Her name is going to stay on the ballot. And one of the interesting points that she mentioned is that she took no money from PACs, which is a hot topic right now, especially for young candidates running. One of the things from the polling aspect in this race was Dr. Abdul is actually ahead. Recent polling showed he's polling 40%. Yep. Stevens is about 32%, and McMorrow is 12%.
Whoa, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. And McMorrow's definitely had been dropping over the last few months. So I think this is probably the right decision. But Haley Stevens really represents the mainstream Democratic establishment. And I would say she's definitely more of the middle of the road. Dr. Abdul is obviously representing the party's progressive wing. He's been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, AOC, and one of the big hot topics of this race is Israel and the influence of outside spending on this election. So, we had Russia, we had China, and now we have Israel in our elections. So who is Haley Stevens? She's a 42-year-old Democratic congresswoman representing Michigan's 11th congressional district. She has served in Congress since 2019. So this is a natural good step for her. She's used to running very tough races, right? She defeated a incumbent Republican when she first ran. So she's used to these intense, close races. What she did previously before coming into Congress, she worked for the Obama administration on the rescue of the U.S. auto industry after the 2008 financial crisis. She served on a presidential task force that oversaw the restructuring of General Motors and Chrysler. And she has made manufacturing, advanced technology, supply chains, and logistics and economic competitiveness like one of the themes of her career. So, I think you both remember when we interviewed her, what was that, 6-9 months ago? She was very focused on manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, she was one of the big people behind the CHIPS Act.
Yes, exactly. Since 2024, she's raised about $13 million. But and then out of that, about 18% has come from PACs. So, she does take a lot of money from AIPAC. 800,000 or 300,000 has come from AIPAC. Sorry. 800 has come from corporate PACs.
That's like not insignificant. I mean, just to kind of
And
pause, I think
yeah,
that seems to be the big knock against her. And I think that is what is getting her into hot water, and frankly is why she's probably pulling behind Abdul Sayed, because he there does seem to be this whole thing on the left of being very anti-APAC,
Yeah.
seeing that there is a bunch of, potentially dark money flowing from Israel into elections. And I think that she has her hands tied because of the connections she's made over time. And what I find interesting about Haley Stevens is that it seems like she's actually doubling down on that and sort of her support of Israel. And I don't know if she's touting her connections to AIPAC, but she's certainly not distancing herself. And I think that this is like the perfect example. Like when we talk about the Democratic Socialists who won in New York, I think that that's kind of a different story because those are safe Democratic seats. It was really a battle for like who was going to win the left in those areas. But what I think is really interesting in this race is that Michigan is a swing state. And so, they're running to fill the seat of a Democratic senator, but that seat is by no means guaranteed a blue seat. And so when you look at kind of, I think at least like what unfortunately has happened is that AIPAC has become such a poison pill in Democratic politics. But then when you look to a general election that is really competitive, I mean, it's the same thing we're seeing happening in Maine with Graham Plattner, right? It's like, what is going to be the thing that's going to break through? And I feel like I don't know about how you guys feel. I feel like I used to be on the team where I was like, she's more moderate. She's going to be able to win over some of these independent voters. I kind of feel like that narrative switching a little bit, and someone like Abdul Al-Sayed, that he might be actually pushing an economic message that is more resonant with people, even though he is much more progressive than Haley is. So I think
well,
that
let's yeah.
what's been happening with the kind of the flow of that kind of corporate money, which we talked about in our previous episode this week, is really exemplary in this race.
Yeah, well, let's just face it, too. The Republicans want Dr. Abdul, mainly, just from his name. They
I
want
like
to
that you
go
call him
against.
Dr. Abdul.
Well,
Like
I
it
feel
feels
like I'm
like
pronouncing.
it feels like he's like a TV doctor.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I think there's a couple things we should talk about. The first being Mallory McMorrow and sort of who she is and what she represented. And then I think the other piece that you brought up, which I want to ask you guys about, is okay, this split of establishment versus new progressive, and like what does that look like in a general. And I think it's worth also mentioning who the Republican candidate is, who's a very well liked, well regarded, real sort of centrist Republican.
Mm-hmm.
So I think getting to the first piece, that the shocker this week was McMorrow suspending her campaign. um is that surprising to you guys? Because I feel like she was starting to have a real moment and obviously rose to prominence, to sort of social media prominence a couple years ago when she gave a very fiery, excellent speech on the state Senate floor, which caught a lot of social media traction. And she was really running as somebody trying to bridge these two worlds, the Democratic establishment that I think is represented by Haley Stevens here, and Dr. Abdul, the real progressive side of things. And just failed to break
Yeah.
through there. I'm curious, like, I'm feeling as though this is the trend of populism right now that is catching on, that we've seen with on the Republican side, where these middle of the road conservatives are just getting totally edged out by these far right MAGA devotees. And then those MAGA devotees really don't stand a chance in the general. Do you think that that the Democrats here are falling victim, if we will, to that same pattern? Or do you think we're
It
really
just
seeing this big bigger tide shift?
That's kind of what I was saying is like, I think I used to feel that way pretty strongly. And I don't know if I've 100% reversed my position, but what I do feel is that I think when I hear Haley Stevens talk, who has now been in Congress for several terms, she sounds very much like a politician.
Mhm.
And she, I think, has, she has a leg to stand on policy wise in the sense that, like, to what Anthony was saying about manufacturing and stuff, she's obviously done a ton that resonates, I assume, with Michiganders, which I have proven by my cold open I am not one of. But I think that there's something to be said for in the way that Trump and some people like him who are speaking with this populist message, we're seeing people like Dr. Abdul El Sayed, that we're seeing people like him, even though he's more progressive, speak in a way that does have that like populist bend to it. And so what I wonder is like, is that populism and that way of speaking about the issues economically going to actually be able, like, I think that maybe it has a better chance of breaking through than what used to be conceived of as like so far left and so not resonant with independent voters. And I do feel like that might be changing, just as it changed with Trump. You had a lot of independents vote for Trump, and I think that he had a way of resonating with people that I do think some of these progressive candidates might. But I don't know. I think it's a gamble for sure. But I think that what we've also proven in a lot of the conversations we've been having is that people are sort of sick of the status quo. And unfortunately, I do think Haley Stevens is very representative of the status quo at the moment, even though she's young and relatively new. When you kind of look at the infrastructure around her, unfortunately, she feels very tied to sort of the establishment.
Well, and that's where I think it was an interesting comment, Anna, you mentioned about Haley Stevens doubling down on Israel is all she's kind of telling everyone is, hey, I've supported Israel from the beginning. So like,
Mm,
this is nothing new. The fact that the temperature has just changed with people, within the country and the world now is a different story. I mean, there is another PAC that's given about $10 million in
Hmm.
supporting Stevens, not directly, but through ads, which has been the huge conversation piece. It's the United Democracy Project, which is called UDP, which is affiliated in some way here. So I will say that what I think happened was Haley Stevens more of that middle of the road. You had and you have Dr. Abdul, who's progressive, and then you had Mallory, who was kind of going in between them. And that in the end just didn't really resonate, I would say.
yeah.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that I think this is really, really frightening from a how do Democrats win standpoint. And I think
Mm,
that what we're seeing right now is there's this kind of debate going on among Democrats and among, the news media and pundits and whatnot. They're like, is the party going ultra left or are they going to tack back to the middle, and how do we win in 2028 and all this stuff? And I think the the bigger thing that's being illuminated here is just how unhappy people are,
mm-hmm.
how frustrated people are, how much isn't working. And I think that everybody needs somebody to blame. And, I understand that. And I understand that like sentiment of, okay, well, this person is a politician. They sound like a politician and they're the status quo. I want change. So I'm going to vote for the change candidate. But I feel like this is cutting off your nose to spite your face 101. And what's going to happen here is that I think this Dr. Abdul has a real chance. I think that a far left progressive candidate does not represent most of the people in Michigan. I don't think that the people in Michigan that I know, when you look at just historically, what are these communities, what are these businesses there? They are not ultra progressive left leaning people and areas. And I think that this is such a detriment that I can see it now. The Democrats are going to fall into. And what's going to happen is we can say right or wrong, but just the politics of it is that this is giving every Republican yet another absolute razor sharp talking point to say, look, the Democratic Party has left you. They have gone so far left without ever taking accountability of their own party, the Republicans' own party's leanings and driftings and whatnot. But this is now going to be the attack, that it's not about Republicans are going to try and paint the Democrats as AOC, Mamdani, and potentially Dr. Abdul. They've already done that. They've already done that. And now the question is, can Democrats still win?
But here's my question about that. I don't disagree with you, but like, that's exactly what happened with the Tea Party that eventually led to Trump and eventually led to the insane amount of power that he has been able to accrue, and the like chokehold that he has on people like Marco Rubio and JD Vance, who, if you go back 10 years, were saying that Trump was, the worst thing that could ever happen to the Republican Party. So I'm not saying that I prefer one over the other, but I kind of wonder if, and I think this has been said by people recently, that there is a little bit of a shock to the system happening for Democrats, because the way that things have been going have been driving a lot of these base voters away, which I think is exactly what base voter Republicans were feeling in 2014, 2015. And I think a lot of those base voters were people who had been galvanized by the Tea Party, had been galvanized by the Freedom Caucus, had been galvanized by these much more far right politicians that maybe at the time seemed very extreme, but then became the total status quo and allowed for the MAGA movement to take shape. So I just wonder if, again, I don't know if this means that a Democrat is going to win in Michigan if Abdul El-Sayed is the one who's the nominee, but it does feel like it's that, 10 years later, what happened to the Republican Party is suddenly happening to the Democratic Party. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing remains to be seen. But it certainly isn't a good thing. Just like it wasn't a good thing for traditional conservatives back then, it's not a good thing for
Right.
traditional Democrats now. And I think Haley Stevens is potentially one of the victims of that. And by the way, we've seen a lot of victims of that on the left thus far, although this one for sure does seem to be more consequential, given that it's such an important Senate seat.
I feel like what we're seeing happen is this whole to just talk about the AIPAC element for a sec. I think that there's very different degrees of what to label all of that. I think we are unequivocally seeing a rising anti-Semitism sentiment in this country. We are also seeing a very strong lobby in AIPAC having very large, perhaps outsized influence on political candidates. That's very real. And I think we're seeing a big anti-Israel with respect to how they've prosecuted this war against Gaza sentiment rising, particularly among the Democratic Party. So I think all those issues are fueling how that has become a major wedge in this race. But I'm reminded of going back to the 2024 election here, when so many in Michigan, particularly in the Arab communities, did not vote for Kamala. And that was a meaningful blow to the Harris campaign. And ultimately, this is what I mean by cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's like, okay, well, we're going to hold you accountable for your AIPAC acceptance and Israel comments and all that. But then, okay, so what do you then get in return? You end up electing the guy or gal, but in this case, guy on the other side, who's going to be a lot worse with respect to what your beliefs and policy wishes are. And I think this is the biggest problem that Democrats keep falling into, is that Democratic voters keep trying to do this purity voting, and they're not being rational with their vote.
But well, here's like a little devil's advocate though, which is we're talking not about the country, we're talking about a state. And as you say that, I wonder, there is a really big Arab population in Michigan. And perhaps that is an electorate that has not been mobilized. So when you talk about the people you know in Michigan and the things that they believe in, whatever, that is a portion of the Democratic electorate potentially. But there's also this population of Arab voters who have never had someone who looked like them, sounded like them, had the same background as them, that suddenly potentially in Abdul al-Sayed they have. And I think that again, like this is all just me theorizing, but like there is something maybe interesting about the theory that when you get someone like him who suddenly is on the ballot in a state where it seems completely improbable that he could be a middle of the road Republican and the guy who could be running against, that what if that opens up the door for a whole other kind of vote, much like we saw with MAGA voters who had never voted before or who had voted for Obama, or, there was a coalition that was built because of the way Trump was communicating, that I do think that there's the possibility. I don't know. There could be a possibility of that because we're talking about very specific demographics of a state. And
well,
so that's
I just was
where
curious.
I wonder if there's.
Yeah, let me give you some of these. So Michigan is home to an estimated 240,000 to 300,000 Muslims. A huge congregation of them are in Dearborn, Michigan, which we've talked about. And so I went back and I just looked up Alyssa Slotkin in 2024 ran against Mike Rogers, who's now running again. And I was curious, what were those numbers like? So she got 2,700,000 votes. He got 2,600,000 votes. So it was a pretty close election there. And so to your point, Anna, I mean, if you are galvanizing this very large active Muslim population, we're not talking about a lot of votes you need. So 50,000 votes that go your way could really sway an election here. So that's interesting.
It's kind of that versus the independent, right? It's like, then are there independent voters who sit out because they don't like either candidate? Or if there's some that go to Mike Rogers, then does maybe a new part of the Democratic base in Michigan make up for that? Like, we don't know, but I think the one thing that I was looking up the candidates earlier, and one really interesting thing about Dr. Abdul, it's in his name, doctor, is that he is in the healthcare side of things. He was, as Anthony said, he was the Detroit Health, he worked as the director of the Detroit Health Department. And when we look at one of the issues that I think a lot of middle class and working class voters are going to be voting on, it is healthcare. And so it'll be very interesting. Similarly, by the way, I think part of what made Alyssa Slotkin so appealing at the time was this idea that she worked in intelligence, that she had this background that was very sort of like pro-democracy and pro kind of like making things quote unquote right. And now we look at something like healthcare, there are people who might be really allured to the idea that there would be someone in the Senate who has run a health department of one of the biggest cities in the country. So that's another element, I think, that we have to not just take like sort of the progressive versus moderate, but I think it behooves all of us to look at the intricacies of who these candidates are, because when they're running on a state and not necessarily for like the presidency or something like that, it can be a more focused campaign to talk to, an issue like that and how it's going to affect people in Michigan.
I think this is also the challenge with the Democratic Party writ large, is that they have always been a big tent party. They've always tried to have a number of coalitions, where I think when you look at the Republican Party, they've done a very successful job at really streamlining a pretty clear top to bottom, fall in line, here's the party message. And whereas Democrats, I feel like what has hurt them in recent elections is that they're the party of 20 different messages. And I think that the concern that I'm seeing with the rise and success of these very left-wing progressive candidates is that it's making it harder and harder for a Democratic Party from the high 10,000 foot view to coalesce all of these messages and groups together under one message. And I think that this spells trouble at the elections in my mind. This spells weakness, and this is chum in the water for Republicans. And not that that is a reason that these places shouldn't elect or nominate far left progressive candidates. I'm saying if that's who these people in this area want, great, do it. Whoever is the most qualified, whoever's the best. But I am fearing this thing that I'm seeing start to form, which is, this just ultimate far left behemoth that really just isn't totally electable in the United States based on how we do elections. And I think that that is ultimately why we have a second term of Trump. This is ultimately, I think, why we got a Trump in the first place. And I think that there's so much anger right now in the country with our politics that the people who fell susceptible for Trump, I think, are starting to fall susceptible to some of these other sexier, left-wing populist messages that, again, give me real concern from okay, how do we kind of get things back on track here without having this be too radical of a yo-yo swing from left to right to left to right. So yeah,
I don't know. Sound
I'm
like
unsure.
a boomer. You sound like my mom.
Yeah.
But I think I sort of agree. I also just think that, to your point, people are not happy. And so, the idea of Medicare for all, which used to seem like a fringe idea, that when phrased differently, you suddenly have a lot of former conservative voters thinking that that might be a good idea. There's just these things that I myself would have disagreed with 5-7 years ago, that now it's kind of look at how rough it is. And is there, is a shock to the system the worst thing? And I don't know the answer to that, but I
Well, a
think that
shock
it's
to the system only works if it wins elections. And that's
but
the
I think
thing that
maybe not this election, but when you look at
but then
what else
again,
is
it's
happening,
but this is the thing is okay, yeah, if you're saying well, maybe not this election, but to me, that's an L. That's a loss. That's oh, okay, these democratic principles and values that I think everybody who says they're a Democrat subscribes to, wherever you are on that spectrum, you are effectively saying, well, I want 100%. I'm not going to take 80%. I only want 100%. And therefore, because I'm not settling for 80, I'm giving the other side the victory. And then it's just this all or nothing that to me is not, it's not how anything works in the real world.
I don't know. I disagree a little bit, because I think that we've seen Republicans pull it off in spades over the last decade.
I'm not
And
sure I'd be willing to
they've
take that
amounted.
bet right now.
What bet?
Which bet?
To swing further left, saying that this group will bring out new voters and whatnot.
Yeah.
To elect.
No, it's certainly a theory, not a certainty.
No. It's interesting. It's really interesting.
Well, we'll see where our girl Haley ends up. But yeah, I mean, I think this race is so emblematic, obviously, given this discussion of what's happening around the country. And I think this and Maine, I mean, breaking news, I don't know if you guys saw that Graham Plattner's reconsidering his run after being accused of sexual assault. So it's but that aside, this Senate race and the main Senate race really did feel like these barometers of progressivism on a competitive stage. So I think that people should keep their eye on Michigan. If you know what's good for you. I feel like that's more like Wisconsin. I feel like that's more like Wisconsin.
You'd be
Senator
surprised how
Minnesota.
similar they are.
Yeah, I feel like there's something about Michigan that's like,
That's more
I mean-
Michigan right there.
there's something about Michigan that you just can't put your finger on. You
Yeah.
know, it's just like cars. We just love making cars.
Yeah. All right, gang.
Sorry, Michiganders.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. If you like what you hear at Political Playlist, please follow, subscribe where you are listening to this now. We always have our video episodes up on YouTube, and you can follow us at Political Playlist on social platforms and leave us a review. Leave us a good review, preferably 4 or 5 stars, and a nice little comment because, we don't want to get our feelings hurt. If you leave us a 1-star review, we might end up drinking our sorrows away, which is never
I am
a good plan.
sensitive.
Thanks for listening.